Welcome to an interview episode of Highly Informed. I'm your host, John Puro. Now, before we get to a very, very exciting interview, I want to note that any views I express are my own. Now, as I always like to do, and most of the time it's successful, I want to do a quick prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy, all dogs and children, if they're around, remain quiet, and may Amazon Prime another time. Amen. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing Bryan Gerber, the CEO of HARA Supply, a major player here in the industry. And I just want to first say thank you for taking the time out of your busy, schedule to join me for this joint endeavor, pun intended.
Thanks for having me on, John. Appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting about the industry today.
Yes. And for those unfamiliar, I do just want to note that HARA Supply is the largest manufacturer of cannabis cones and combustibles in the world. And you produce 100 million plus cones monthly, which means that you produce over 1 billion per year, which leads me to my first, always incredibly serious question. Do you enjoy being able to say that you sell 1 billion items per year? Because that is an amazingly large round number. Is there any enjoyment that you get in being able to say it? And do you do it with accents or impersonations?
I reserve the Dr. Evil impersonation for my closest confidants, but no, it is pretty cool to say that we produce over 1 billion cones a year and products alike. I think a lot of people don't realize the scale of millions to billions and what type of infrastructure and setup that really entails.
Got it. So look, all of us came from somewhere before the cannabis industry, being the age that it is. So I'm curious to know, out of all the experiences that you went through, skills that you built up, prior to the cannabis industry, which did you think has been most instrumental or useful in your leadership role at HARA Supply?
So I'm one of the fortunate ones that never had a career before this industry. I graduated university and then went straight into the startup world. And so, but I can tell you, persistence and tenacity.
Yes, I as a parent of girls, I read all my self-improvement articles. They always say that, if there's going to be a determination of success and or happiness, persistence, right? Stick-to-itiveness is, what you want to roll with. So much appreciated, right? If at first you don't succeed, try again. Or if at first you don't succeed, get high again, right? There's got to be some pop pun option that we could come to. So got it. So you are one of the lucky few that was born straight into this industry professionally and, were able to kind of succeed with it. So now being a leader and, in the lofty perch, the pop perch that you've reached, what advice would you give to other leaders, in the cannabis industry? What tips would you put out there?
Yeah, so in terms of startup world culture, right? I think the bootstrapping and cash management is a major topic and something that I think a lot of startups that I invest in or do angel investing in, I just preach all day. Cash is king. Focus on managing the cash, lower the burn as fast as possible, and try to get to cash flow positive. I think that's definitely one of the biggest ones because it's necessary to keep alive and keep the lights on. And I think a lot of people in our industry thought that it was going to kind of be like big tech, where we can raise unlimited funds and keep going and burn this guy to rob Paul to pay Peter to pay Sally to, that type of thing. So I think that's definitely a big thing. And I think a lot of uh, other things that I say revolve around finding revenue streams, right? Go figure it out, right? I think a lot of new industries, there's a lot of rocks that go unturned. And I say turn over every rock because you never know what pot of gold might be under that. And I think for us as HARA Supply, kind of morphing from, the paraphernalia, smoking accessories world to getting into this massive pre-roll, solutions partner, behemoth company it really showed that, we started in one lane and then figured out many more revenue streams to keep the business growing. And I think now looking back, hindsight bias, obviously 2020, I think to really build a big business, you need multiple revenue streams.
Yeah. So, look, you stick in a lane, but I think flexibility, right? And also, as you said, the vision to expand, right? As you're growing to continue having, money coming in the door. Yeah,
Yep.
I find it funny the way that you were saying, cash is king. People might forget that. And there's plenty of attrition in the industry that we see all the time, right? In terms of people who forget fundamental, items like that.
Yes, I get surprised every day hearing a new story about took money, bought a Ferrari, bought an apartment, I'm like, why can't I be like that?
Well, you could be like that now, right? Because you've earned the right to be, right?
Right.
But why did you, why not? It's not necessarily a requirement. A Ferrari, I would say, for most startup companies, if I'm correct, since I'm just on the the service industry side of it. But yeah, I don't think it's a requirement.
Exactly.
Yeah, I always have like little things pop in my brain, by the way. Here's a slogan for you. We supply what gets you high. There you go. Boom. All right. That's a freebie for you. I'm sure you have something like that. Now, in your time in the industry, what would you say that I always like to focus on? What are some of the biggest surprises? Um, at this point, it's not surprising, as you said, when you hear stories about wonderful ways that people have crashed and burned outside the industry. But what are some of the biggest surprises to you from where you sit?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest surprises, not just from poor leadership that I see in the industry, but the turnover is insane. I mean, the roles get replaced every other week. Especially on our side of the business development, you're sitting there for 90 days going through custom sampling, tooling, all different types of stuff. And you get to the finish line where we're about to go put the order in, and that person gets fired. And you're like, oh no, okay, now I got it. And then Sally picks it up, and she's like, I have no idea why we're even here today. I'm like, well, we were working with Joey for 9 months, and Joey's no longer there. So Sally, you're here picking up the pieces. Let me kind of break it down for you. Right. So I think turnover has been, one of the biggest pain in the butts in this industry and surprises. Another surprise is just how much people can raise and spend in a very short amount of time. It's quite intriguing, I guess. I've seen it, we deal with a lot of the big MSOs, we deal with a lot of the processors, and I think just, some of these guys are able to just continuously raise funds and keep raising. And it's like, where's the light at the end of the tunnel? For us, we raised $3.5 million back in 2018, 2019, and we've been cash flow positive since. And so, for us, it's a different kind of story of, we didn't go out and raise tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think that's another one, is like doing, a lot with a little bit. And a lot of people seem to have a lot and can't figure out how to do a little, you know. But I would say those are probably the two biggest surprises that I've come across in this industry.
Are there processes that you put into place to streamline, having to deal with someone new outside of, forwarding the old email chain? Is there anything you've done to, kind of get accustomed to the fact that there is such frequent turnover?
I've really tried nurturing C-suite relationships so that regardless who ends up becoming the buyer or the supply chain person, I'm friendly with the person at the top. Has seemed to
And,
help.
and And I think that that touches upon something like there is something in my mind, right, completely unique about how collegial the cannabis industry is. And I've always tried to put my finger on it. And I don't know if it comes all the way back to like the puff puff pass mentality, right? That sharing is ingrained as part of the culture. But I'm
Yeah.
curious to know if you agree, right? And that, and how important, relationships can be in this industry.
Yeah, no, I think this goes back to like my early days of being an entrepreneur where everyone's like, "Oh, I need you to sign an NDA to talk to you," or I need, I can't, if I give you my idea, then you're just going to steal it from here. And I realized if you sit in a room by yourself telling yourself your own ideas. It never helps anyone or yourself. And so this industry specifically, I feel like when you get into a C-suite room, people are talking about what's working, what's not working, what have you guys tried, whatever else, right? But I think a lot of kind of that core initial kind of, gray market guys are still very like close to the chest. They don't share resources or secrets or whatever it is. But I think a lot of the companies that we sit with, where we're like, they're like, well, we want to implement automation. And we say, well, great. We know Hephaestus, we know pre-roller, we know accelerant, we know all these guys. Here's all the offerings, here's all the information, do with what you will, right? I'm not here to make the decision for you, but I can offer, optionality, right? And so I think that's been a lot of the side where, to your point, the puff puff pass, but I think it's the specific rooms are willing to kind of communicate, but I don't think it's the whole market is ready to kind of open up the Komodo and say, this is how we do it. You know, it's a lot of
And look, yeah, I like to say there's a difference between the can tenders and the pretenders, right? And to a certain extent, I feel like, people who are newer to the industry don't understand that collegiality exists, right? And
right.
are therefore more skeptical. And some of these folks that are coming in from the illicit market, they're used to being cloak and dagger, kind of cloak and dagger in the illicit market. And so it's a process before they realize that they can, open up. And there are things that happen, but I think in general there's just something unique about this industry in terms of that. I now by the way, I mean, how much do you so first off, as I always like to say, my favorite pop pun, being a Jewish guy, Mer Wazel Tov on having one raise and then being able to just continuously expand to where you are. Do you think that that's a function of being the pickaxes in the industry versus plant touching when it comes down to it, like that partially played how that played out?
So I think first off, why raise more money than you need? You're just going to dilute yourself. And so that's, 101 for founders. But, at this point, the original founders still own majority equity. We control the board. We're fully autonomous. We basically get to wake up and work with our best friends every day. So, it's a different setup than I think a lot of people get themselves into, which is a loan to own setup with a lot of these companies. And they don't realize what they're signing on or they're signing away. And when one thing goes wrong, we're coming in, you're out, and we're going to restructure this thing, right? For us, we feel like we're the experts. We know how to drive the ship properly. And I feel like if I got replaced or my other co-founders got replaced, I don't even know if the company would survive. Like it's just so for us, I think on the picks and shovels side, you know, of course I'd love to see a Hemper pre-roll on the shelf one day, right? But for us, I realized that the customers are, the MSOs, it's an input play, right? If you're selling them cones, okay, let's go to tubes next. Let's go to, blunts. Let's go to, glass tipped cones. Whatever the input is, it's really just like create a great service, have great customer service, deliver time and time again, people will keep coming back, right? And there's been so many, getting back to that finding revenue opportunities, is a lot of our customers come to us and say, hey, you guys did so great with this. Can you do this? And we figure out how to do it for them. And so I think a lot of people are just tired of getting burned and the turnover and dealing with multiple different supply chain sources and not really having a centralized location or someone they can actually trust that can deliver. Because before us, like, I'll give you an example, like Jeter Dreamfields, right? Their first orders with us were like 10,000 cones. You see the volume Jeter does today, right? And so it's, nurturing the customer, whether they're at the start or the end, right? And we can kind of come in no matter what part of the journey you're on and really, fix issues or solidify that infrastructure and get you exactly what you need when you need it.
Got it. So now one thing that you touched upon, right, is that you are also, in terms of another hat that you wear, a high hat. Oh man, I gotta restrain it. The pop puns are just always trying to spill out. But you're also the CEO and founder of HARA Brands, and you referenced, Hemper. So if you could just give us like a little bit of an intro to that, I think that might be, kind of helpful for the audience.
For sure. So uh, I'll do long story short. So company started in 2015, originally on the smoking accessory side, which we started a brand called Hemper, which was a direct to consumer subscription box, kind of like Dollar Shave Club for stoners.
Yep.
And we morphed that into kind of this like celebrity curated box where it was like smoke like Snoop Dogg for a month. About a year and a half doing that, we kind of got away from the celebrities and started moving more into like our own proprietary themed. And we realized that the subscription box was our Trojan horse marketing outlet for developing new smoking accessories. And so what we figured out was that this was our paid test market for us to go design, develop, and implement new products that made your ritual better. And so Hemper has now become an international brand. We're sold in about 55 countries. We've serviced over 2 million customers in the last decade. We've got one of the largest social media followings, and we've got over 500 different products that we've developed. And so with Hemper, a lot of the new initiatives for growth have been getting smoking accessories into like convenience stores, so like mass market, 7-Eleven, Circle K. We've been doing a lot of international shows. I was telling you before, we were at the Mary Jane Berlin, which ended up being like 50,000 consumers and B2B, B2C focused folks from Germany and all the surrounding countries. And so, there's a lot going on internationally. Germany went legal. We're in uh, going to the Czech Republic for another show here in a couple months, which they're probably going to be the next country to go more
Yep.
fully legal. And so I think that domino effect has really kind of like rebirthed Europe, I think. Not just, oh, look at what's going on in North America. It's legal here. I think now Europe is starting that domino effect where we kind of picked up a lot of steam over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, as I like to say, you have a trailblazer in each geographic region, which is unfortunately why one reason what's happening in Thailand, is where they legalize and then it just exploded and they're pulling back is something that I feel is almost like I say, like a golden nugget, not getting enough attention that it could be, that's not something that's really happened in the industry before.
Right. I don't know if you saw though today or yesterday, the prime minister got kicked out.
Well, no. So thank you for breaking news. I live in my cannabis, bubble, and I had not checked my podcast news aggregator. So,
Yeah.
hot off the presses, whenever we release this interview, I mean, I actually no, lukewarm off the presses to possibly a little bit cooler off the presses, but interesting. I did not see that. So that could be an interesting change
Oh,
in the
I
winds there.
we have a lot of customers in Thailand, and they basically told us that now that he got kicked out for fraud or something, and so
Oh,
now, and he was the one opposing all the cannabis laws, and so now they think it's going to go back to normal or even be more prolific, and so a lot of our customers there are actually ordering now so that in
they'll have it
anticipation.
on hand. Got it. That's very, very cool. So, here's the thing, like the overarching thing for me is I feel like ultimately convenience wins, right? I feel like it's how Amazon won, and I feel like, we see as the different sectors looking at the data how things grow, things like pre-rolls and everything. Do you feel that, convenience wins out in, cannabis, and that's how I mean, look, you talk about convenience in terms of people being able to come to you at any time and get what they want, right? And so also even when that includes innovation, but I'm curious to know your thoughts about like trends towards convenience and how you guys cater to that.
Yeah, definitely. So on the convenience side, obviously just taking apart the pre-roll category, I think it's 10 to 15% here, roughly. It's roughly closer to 20% in Canada. And I think just taking from the tobacco, cigarette industry, right? Like that is the most convenient method for consuming tobacco. So I think the pre-roll segment is developing at a rapid pace now than previous it was. I think that's from a lot more automation in play, availability of cones and providers like myself, HARA Supply, more solutions partner approaches as well, because I think a lot of these companies are trying to get away from the monkey see, monkey do act and try and come out their own unique, innovative products. And our pitch is really, hey, let us help you figure out what your Coca-Cola is. We know you don't know what it is yet, but we'll walk down the path with you, right? And so I think on the convenience factor, the rise of multi-packs is kind of the new, 30 rack when we were in college or high school, right? It's like I want to go to hang out with my buddies. I'm bringing 14 joints with me. It's all in one pack, and I don't have to figure out who's smoking what. Everyone gets their own, right? And especially post-COVID era, that's kind of what's been happening a lot more, 0.25, 0.35 gram joints. You show up with 5, 10, 15 of them, and all your buddies get to smoke their own, right? And I think the micro consumption methods are becoming way more prevalent now. And I think that whole can of curious world is definitely exponentially increasing. So I think the people that want 0.1, 5 or 10 times a day, right, are now coming out more because of the availability of the products. And the people that want to smoke 1 gram once a day aren't really the customer anymore, right? And so now we're appealing to, obviously GTI, one of our large clients. They've got the Dog Walkers brand, which is very popular. And I think that's kind of what the future is for consumption and convenience, is really just these, what is the 10 pack? What is the 14 pack? So I can, interchange strains, but the mode and the medium is still that microdose joint.
So I think that raises an interesting question, right? So we're talking about, so it's interesting, right? There are certainly, when we talk about the kind of curious, there are folks who are going to put their foot down and they're never going to, smoke or anything like that, right? However, that begins to shift, and it's interesting. We're talking about the puff puff pass mentality, and in a post-COVID world, right? There's a movement, something like that, that everyone gets their individualized thing, and the joint experience, pun always intended, is that everyone's sitting having their own joint, right? And so, as you're saying, the kind of curious could get a little bit more open to smoking, right? When what they're smoking is getting smaller and smaller, right? And it's also funny because when you're passing around something that's big, you're only having a certain little amount, right? But it's very, very different when you're actually just holding something tinier, psychologically, that, people who wouldn't necessarily, smoke previously might be open to doing so when they see, oh, I'm not going to get that messed up. It's only this little thing. I'm in control entirely of how much I'm smoking of it.
Right. And I think another factor is just the taste and flavor profile of a smaller pre-roll, right? You're getting better flavor. Most of the hits to get to the finish line are fresh hits. When you're smoking a 1 gram joint, you're smoking this thing, but by, 25% of the way through, it kind of just tastes like shit, you know? And a lot of people want to move on, and I get why, right? So that the rise of this multi-pack micro dose, 0.25, I've seen all the way down to 1.5 gram joint. Like we do a brand called Pinners up in Canada. It's
Mhm.
the tiniest, it's more paper than cannabis.
The podcast is proud to be sponsored by eBottles. If you're in the cannabis business, you know that quality packaging isn't just important, it's essential. That's where eBottles comes in. Whether you're just starting out or scaling up, eBottles offers proprietary, top-of-the-line packaging products built for cannabis. eBottles is the market leader for a good reason. They are experts in the field. 6 patents, 5 warehouse locations around the country, and a network of exceptional distributors. So get eBottles and grow boldly.
Got it. I just came up with Bitty Blunts, right? There's a mini blunt brand name right there that we could throw out there. So I'm also curious to know, in terms of, the innovation that you're seeing, are people, and we have for the kind of curious, there's catering and other product categories that ties to effects based. Are you seeing different things in terms of what's being mixed in terms of effects based, and that's another place of innovation, or not necessarily as much?
Yeah, no, on the pre-roll side for innovation, like I would say, connoisseur infused market really has taken off over the last few years. I think people realize that, adding in a little bit of whether it's water hash, rosin, I'm not a big
Keith,
fan of
yeah.
distillate, keef, whatever it is, really does pack that punch, right? And I think for the consumer that's looking for more of a higher THC level, that does get that across for them when they'd have to smoke like 2 or 3 regular joints to really get the same feeling, right? And then I think another trend that's been coming up is more premium pre-rolls. So like ceramic filter tips on it, glass filter tips, wood filter tips, those types of things, which we've been really dishing out to a lot of companies recently. And, also on the kind of not tobacco alternative, but like a hemp blunt as well. So we do like a product for Steezy called the Steezy 40s, which is like a glass tipped hemp blunt, and people love it. It smokes awesome. The glass tip is a really elevated experience, and to ceramic and glass, the touch is cool. So as you're smoking it, it actually feels cooler than it is smoking a regular joint with like a paper filter tip.
Yes, having experienced it firsthand is completely different and better, in my opinion, in terms of that aspect of it. So, that's, I think, a great insight. Are there other types of innovation that you're seeing, in other, kind of categories that you touch upon in anything? They're like, so by the way, just to be clear, in terms of like the premium that you're saying, that comes down to the plant that's going into it, right? That this, what, like a limited release kind of vibe of a specific strain is what you're referring to with that one?
So, like, I think, well, as you know, consistently growing cannabis, the same strain all the time is very difficult.
I know. It doesn't exist,
Yeah,
actually.
right, exactly. So I think that a lot of companies are trying to get that across where, I can have my cookies brand, my cookie strain all the time. It's the same levels, it's the same terp profiles, doesn't really exist, right? So I think a lot of these brands, and this could just be kind of a marketing ploy. Like when I was living in California, Lowell Farms used to do these like limited edition packs, right? And my business partner would be like, dude, that's just like excess inventory that they put into a multi-pack. That's not limited edition. They didn't have enough cannabis to fill all these packs as this one strain, so they did a multi-strain box. And I'm thinking as the consumer, wow, this is really cool. I get one strain times 10. I get 10 different strains in this box. That's really cool. And I'm basically drinking the Kool-Aid on the marketing, right? And so you don't really know, right, whether it was purposeful or they were fixing a problem or things like that. But in terms of like innovation, I think in other categories, I think like really fast onset edibles are really important because I think the time delay, one, confuses
Yeah.
consumers. They don't know how to operate, whether like, can I get out of my chair yet, or is the ride about to start? You know, and so I think like the 2 milligram or the 5 milligram little mints or whatever. I think 1907 or 1933, one of those companies does it pretty well.
1906.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
1906. Yeah. And so that I think is really important because I think people get overdosed on edibles really quickly and they don't realize like the onset's coming and they don't know when. So I think
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
yeah, so like nanoemulsification, all that type of stuff is really important. And I think that's why people go towards edibles and like the more microdose side is because it's more controllable and I know that I'm not going to get it obliterated today. But in terms of like bulk flower, I mean, there's not much innovation besides crazy looking bags. Um, on vape carts, I think that's still very much a repurposed market. I don't think anyone has really developed new technology that really takes it to the next level. I saw recently a company came out with like a disposable rosin device where you can put like maybe like 0.25 of rosin in it. But I was looking at the device and as a rosin user myself, I was like, okay, if I reheat that pen twice, I'm smoking poop, like dirt, basically, right? It's terpenes are burnt off by then. I'm not getting any flavor and it kind of tastes like shit. So I think a lot of the innovation has still escaped this market, but I think a lot of the like kind of nerdy science cannabis guys are figuring out, okay, if we tweak this, we can get a better plant and maybe better genetics, or we can get rid of some of the bad parts of this plant, through like tissue cultures and that type of innovation. But I think in terms of like the end product, people are still trying to figure it out. I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. And I do respect, the good marketing thing, and no matter how it's motivated, he said as he took his sip out of a Stanley cup that one of his daughters bought rather than a construction worker. There we go. Actually, so I want to go back to like the innovation thing, because I was impressed by something you said, that a lot of people are, kind of focused on it, or having their own, I guess, like customized, right? I'm curious to know, in terms of the folks that are, looking for those, and you said Hemper was this amazing, almost market research tool. You're up to offering 500 different products. you know, is there a demographic that you see, the people who want customization or the people who want innovation? Is it the big folks? Is it the brand new folks trying to establish a foothold that are actually like thinking ahead? I'm curious to know how that breaks down.
So from an MSO perspective, I think they're just trying to get the wheels turning in a consistent manner. I don't think they're trying to complicate their business any more than it already is. So when we pitch innovation on the pre-roll side to them, they kind of don't know what to do with it yet. And I'd have to fight really hard to get this across the table, right? When you look at more of those SSO, operators that are going into more of the key strategic markets that are brand focused, they're the ones that are looking for the innovation, right? Because I think those are owned by more of like the heady owners, or kind of like the old school cannabis 1.0 guys, right? And I think that they're the ones looking for the innovation. I think the MSOs are just looking to create a quality product that's really consistent and it's on the shelf all the time, right? Which is kind of the Walmart method, right?
Yeah.
And guys like Jeter and Steezy and those brands are really truly looking for the innovation. And I think that's what's going to keep the kind of the social proof aspects of them being more popular than another MSO brand, is that kind of grassroots, like, oh, we're developing new stuff, or we got these new strain flavors or new terpene profiles or whatever it is. So I think those are the guys that are looking for it. I think the MSOs are really just looking to stay consistent, have product available, and fix all their issues, you know?
Yeah, no, and I think that makes sense, right? Because there's so many brands there, right? Everyone is trying to be the national brands, right? Arguably, only one has crossed over at this point. And so, like, if you're competing in this, kind of stoner, slaughterhouse of brands, right? Innovation is one path. Marketing is another path to differentiating yourself. So it makes sense, as you said, right? They're not trying to be the Walmart. They're trying to stick out and last. So
Yes.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I always like to, geek out. Like, I'm trying to be the dankest dork, the most ganja geek that you know. And I always like to ask, my interviewees who have access to different types of data, what are surprises that you see in the data? What are trends that you are seeing that, you're comfortable, sharing from your position in the industry?
One thing that continuously surprises me is how much distillate cartridges are sold in this country. I don't know who's using them. I mean, I know who's using them, but I mean, it's like poop soup and a cartridge, you know,
Yeah.
and there's companies that are doing 2, 3, 4, 500 million a year selling distillate in carts or vapes or whatever. And I just don't understand it. I don't think consumers really understand it, what they're smoking. And even in markets like Nevada, where we're using remediation tactics to get rid of microbials and heavy metals and all this stuff, and we're reintroducing it back into the market in edibles and carts. And it's like, something doesn't sound all right here. But yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest ones, is how much distillate product is sold in this country.
I
And
think.
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I agree with you. It's when you're dealing with the end consumer, right? We speak this language so well, having been in it so long, that everything just becomes, secondhand. And yet, when interacting with people out there and trying to tell them about the difference between hemp products and state licensed products, they have no idea. Like the question I get more than anything for consumers is, why can I buy that in a gas station? Right, and it just shows that that there's this level of not knowing,
Right.
that is surprising. And I just think that that's a function of familiarity to a certain extent, that people like us who are constantly dealing with this. And and it's like the same thing that where you're talking and you use acronyms like this with an assumption that people are going to understand, and there's that base level of standing that sometimes isn't there. Not to say that we were doing that at all in this conversation, but it's just an example of how you literally start speaking a specific language with baseline knowledge. And it's crazy when you see that people are just
Right.
the
Like,
major consumers out there are not anywhere near that level of understanding.
right. The whole like trend that's been going on in our country about don't use seed oils anymore, right? That's basically distillate, people.
We're pulling back the layer. We just did like a Mara muck raking thing, right? Brian's
Yeah.
like, newsflash, right? So all consumers out there.
Right. And I think to your point about the, D8 stuff that's going on, I think that's a big conversation that I was having at Benzinga about 6 months ago was like the dispensaries, like, I don't know if they even realize if they don't have their merchandising proper, they don't have product on the shelves, they're losing the sale to the smoke shop around the corner or the gas station around the corner where I can get my snack, my $5 Delta 8 pre-roll. I can get my $5 cart from there. I can get my drinks and I can get all my accessories, right? And I think the MSOs are losing a lot of business to these, gas station, the D8, the hemp market, right? Hemp derived market. But I don't think consumers really realize what they're even inhaling or consuming, right? I think like the FDA has done a shit job at figuring out how to really regulate this and stop this, and the DEA and the ATF and all these guys that are claiming they're pulling stuff off the shelves, I really don't think they are. And I think it's just kind of like, well, it's kind of happening, so we can't enforce it because we don't have enough manpower. But it's like, you probably do, but you choose not to. And and I think a lot of these companies, when I'm like pitching merchandising programs to MSOs, and they're like, well, it's not really a focus. I'm like, well, is it losing more business to the guy around the corner that's selling the D8, the smoke shop, and the snack at the same time? Because to convince a dispensary chain why 7-Eleven has a Slurpee machine and why they have cups and straws is a hard conversation to get through.
I never forget, like one of the pieces of law school that I go back to the most is, it's not one thing to just make the law, it's another thing to enforce it. And I mean, frankly, look at I think it comes down to a certain extent like a variation on degree, right? The fact that cannabis doesn't kill people comes in very handy when the DEA has to make a choice between fentanyl enforcement, right, and enforcement against some of these cannabinoids. I remember the Delta 8 joint FDA CDC thing. What did they say? 646 people went to the hospital and then they were fine. Right. And so like, I think that almost plays to our advantage. But this is, also in your role here, I mean, you're selling, picks and shovels to state license and hemp folks, right? I mean, you have Hemper, right? And so like, you get to occupy a position where there's no choosing size or anything, right? You're catering to whatever vehicle it is that people are, getting, and you actually have an insight into the relative size of the markets also is one interesting point, I would say, with where you are occupying the industry.
Definitely. Yeah, no, we see it, going to like a Champs trade show. If you look at the show floor, I mean, there's so many D8 hemp derived THCA brands. It You would think that it was legal and normal and totally cool. Yeah. And I,
Yeah.
I think what's really shitty is like now I guess they're finding like, with the whole Amanita gummies and all these crazy gummy product or mushroom products, that it's actually like synthetic DMT and all these crazy other
Yep.
synthetic drugs. And it's just like, what is going on? Like, what happened to just smoking good old fashioned cannabis?
The way that you delivered that line sounded a little bit McConaughey-esque. That was even like that. I appreciated that for some reason. It almost got drawish, and it rose above for that reason for me. Had to say that. So look, as a success story in terms of expanding from the three co-founders to now over 2,000 employees, what are the next steps that you see in terms of growing the company, right? I mean, we talked about, expanding into different product lines. What are that or regions? I mean, you touched upon where do you see growth coming in the next couple steps?
Definitely. So one of our big initiatives has been getting the reliance of this industry off of China and moving things outside of that. So we've been investing heavily in India and the infrastructure that we have over there. And so we've been pulling, obviously, we did cones out of there. We're doing glass out of there now. We just started our own injection mold facilities. So we're actually doing packaging now out of India. And so definitely getting away from the tariff issues and all, those extra expenses that a lot of the packaging companies put on the customers nowadays. You don't get that working with us because we're pulling it out of a different country. So definitely that. And I think in terms of the domestic market, merchandising and helping figuring out these dispensary chains, how to successfully bring accessories in and sell them to your customers, right? I think people need to realize that your customer that's coming to buy their eighth for the week does not care about a t-shirt or a lanyard anymore, right? It just doesn't work. It's not hasn't worked. It never worked. It isn't going to work, right? And everyone's focused on, oh, well, it's only 1% of our total top line revenue. Well, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't focus on it, it's going to stay at 1%, right? And so I think showing them that it can be 5% of your total top line, and here's your path to that. And we're going to help, in terms of distribution and making sure all the shelves are stocked. And here's your merchandising program. Here's your planogram. Here's all these things that traditional retailers focus on that we just somehow can't figure out in this industry. So helping them figure that part out, and then definitely international, right? That's been massive for us. In terms of just getting out there, like I said, we were in Germany, we were in Spain for Spanibus. I mean, it's so ingrained in the culture there. It's just a matter of time where once it goes fully legal, it's already there. It's the infrastructure, the farms, everything is already there. It's really just like, can the governments and the parliament and all these prime ministers get their act together and realize it's the undertone's been there, just let's bring it out,
Yeah, there's no issue like this where, say, in the US, you have 70% support, right? And when you see the polls in Europe, like Italy, very, very conservative country in certain respects, the polls are crazy in terms of, being in favor of it. And yet crossing the finish line becomes so difficult because of what I'm still calling, though I don't love the pop pun, marijuana no betters, right? That it's just, like there's that puritanical roots that is, whether it's from the Pope himself or whatever it is in Italy, right? That it's just like we can't. It's difficult. We need a worldwide ballot initiative is what I think we need. Is that the people in the world can be like, hey, governments of the world, 70% of us are down for this. This drug is less harmful than alcohol. Why don't we try it? So I always like to wrap up, by the way, but I never can decide what I want to call it. So please, I do want your vote, right? So now, Bryan, I want you to be either Tokerdamus or Smokerdamus, and let us know which one you like. You are putting on your wizard hat, in the stylized like a joint, right? Throw out anything that you foresee on a macro, micro level, on a near, far term basis for the industry, just throw out some thoughts.
I have to pick whether I'm Tokerdamus or Smokerdamus.
That's the most important part of the question. Okay.
I'm going with Tokerdamus. And in terms of macro, micro level, good question.
Just anything, pops in your brain box.
I think everyone is fooling themselves on federal legalization and the timeline. I keep saying this time and time again. There is no way federal government can play friendly with the states by increasing more taxes.
Do you think that, the progress that's made on the hemp side is like a form of stealth federal legalization? I mean, we have hemp D9 beverages being sold in major alcohol chains at this point.
I know everyone's pissed off at Total Wine. I think it's letting the big boys play in the gray. I don't think it's doing much, you know.
It doesn't actually push us forward, you're saying, because it's risk appetite that if people are wandering out there when we realize at any point, hey, the next farm bill could come along and all that could be put back in the bottle. With potentially good reason, considering the lack of regulation and some of these cannabinoids. So I think that's your take on that.
Yes.
Okay. Any quick closing thoughts? Because I don't want to run over too much and infringe on your time when you've been so giving with it.
If you need to contact us for any reason, HARA Supply, we're the premier solutions partner for the pre-roll category. We're here to help, whether we do it or not.
All right. Whether they'll do it if they can. Exactly. That's how they got to where they are. So look, Bryan, I just want to say I thought that was, fascinating, and I really, really appreciate your taking the time. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you having me on today.